I think the question was about the Environmental Protection Agency and whether and how and when it would take action, primarily under the Clean Air Act, to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Well, I think I'd say a couple of things. First of all, I think both the EPA's preference and certainly the President's preference is for there to be legislation that addresses both the energy and climate issues head on. EPA has gone ahead with a few things. Of course, there's a Supreme Court case that said that greenhouse gas emissions could be regulated as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act, and EPA has gone ahead working on the finding that greenhouse gases pose a danger to public health and welfare, and is going ahead with the fuel economy standards. Based on that, they've also issued regulations to require that companies of certain size report their greenhouse gas emissions, and anything else that's potentially in the wings. I think again, certainly the strong preference is for legislation.
There was another question back there. I'm sorry, right over there.
David Burwell from Funders Network. Michael Jackson, not the Michael Jackson, but the Michael Jackson who is CEO of AutoNation, was on TV last week saying that at $4 a gallon, everybody was talking about electric vehicles. At $2.50 a gallon, nobody's talking about electric vehicles. So what about the stabilization of the price of gasoline? Perhaps, it's been proposed a variable oil security tax at about $3.50 a gallon, $3.50 a gallon, to provide the stable price you need to encourage the innovations you all want. Is that?
Let me even tack onto your question, since it's a favorite subject of mine. What if you had a $1 a gallon gasoline tax and 45 cents of that dollar went to pay for health care, 45% went to pay down the deficit, and 10% went to subsidize poor people for health care and poor people of lower means for their driving? It would seem to make a lot of sense to me in the current climate. Is there an ice cube's chance in hell that could get through the Congress or the Senate right now?
No.
No.
But let me explain. Let me explain, if I might. Let me explain. My understanding is that if you're in New York City and you're going to go see some strange relatives in Bayonne, New Jersey, you pack an emergency kit, you plan it for some months, and then go the 50 or 60 miles because it's a pretty big and unusual outing for the family. Mm-hmm. In North Dakota, they go 200 miles one way to pick up parts back the same day. We actually use twice as much fuel per capita as New Yorkers do. Why? It's just the nature of the geography in a state like Wyoming or North Dakota, Iowa, and so on. So when you talk about that kind of policy, the impact is twice as significant on someone in one of those states as it is on someone in one of the large cities. And so that's part of the dilemma, and it is not something just to brush off. It's a real and a significant difference in burden.
Can I say, Tom, that actually the Christians had a better chance against the Lions than Congress would have if it tried to increase the price of gasoline by $1 or $2 with a tax. So the cap and trade system actually accomplishes much of the same goals, and it does so in a way that's consistent with what the Europeans are doing and what we already did with our Clean Air Act in order to deal with the sulfur dioxide issues. But I want to know where you can buy gasoline for $2.50 right now, because it has gone back up, $80 a barrel. It's going as China and India, Europe come out of recession. We're in a very brief period, a lull before this limited resource is again stressed by rapid economic growth in developing nations. And I think that we can no longer view it in terms of our own nation, but in terms of the pressures of that limited resource, on that limited resource from around the world. So it will be back up to $4 a gallon. The only question now is, we wise enough to put in place the policies that anticipated going back up again? Because $4 at some day might be the good old days in terms of the price of gasoline at the rate at which China trying to build 20 new cities of 10 million apiece by 2030, and others put the pressure on that limited resource. So I don't think we have to worry. I think the American people got the message, and I think they're ready for new policies that move us towards this electrification agenda.
It is sad, though, that OPEC can raise our gas prices by $1 a gallon to fund people who've drawn a bullseye on our back, but our Congress can't raise it $1 a gallon to fund schools, hospitals, and innovation in America.
It's not easy to pass a cap-and-trade system either, okay? So the bullseye is there anyway. When you try to take on the approach, the fossil fuel approach that we've had for over 100 years. Again, even here in the electrification system, Thomas Alva Edison would still recognize our electricity system in the same way before we broke up AT&T. Alexander Graham Bell would have recognized our telephone system. But it's not easy. You know, it's one thing to perestroika is interesting because it's one thing to try to destroy the past, but inventing the future is not easy, okay? So we're in the hard part of it right now in trying to invent this new future, but if we stick with it, I think it's something that we can all accomplish together.
Fair enough. Please.
If I could say something, I think that the question and the way it was framed really says a lot about where we are. The coalition is talking about being able to have a planful way to be able to see our future. But when your forecast for hybrids or electric technology or electric powertrain is most accurately being represented by AutoNation, a retailer that just tells you the short-term consumer-driven market that we're in order to get out of that, we have to move for something that has a bit more central planning and coordinated efforts, because the most accurate information we get today would definitely be from a retailer.
And if you don't have a system, you don't have a solution.
Correct.
You know.
And Waxman-Markey builds in $20 billion for advanced automotive technology into the legislation, in addition to funding for the smart grid and the funding for many of the rest of these projects, by the way, which would not be possible unless we had this cap-and-trade system that generated the revenues that made it possible for us to put in place this infrastructure for the future.
All the way back.
I'm Neil King with the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to ask either Smith or Mr. Ghosn a question just about the government role. There's been talk about acting as a regulator, as tax incentives, for purchasers at the consumer end. But I'm just curious what role in this roadmap you see just strict outlays of money, billions of dollars needed potentially from the government when it comes to the whole scalability from the battery side, electric vehicles, or the smart grid from that matter. Obviously, the DOE has already put out, $25 billion in loan guarantees. Are you talking about the need for something much greater than that when it comes to just budget outlays?
Well, let me answer the question specifically, and then let me answer it in a more general way. I believe I'm correct, and I defer to Robbie Diamond here, but all of the recommendations that we have, which are in 4 categories: batteries and vehicles, charging infrastructure, electrical power sector interface, and consumer acceptance, are on pages 116 to 119 of the report. They're very specific. There's 7 specific things. And the total cost of that over the time horizon here, as I believe we were briefed, is $128 billion. Now, that obviously is a lot of money. But if you take the cost of the externalities that we're experiencing, one, and obviously, as Chairman Markey has pointed out, is the environmental cost. Number 2, as we tried to point out, I think successfully up here a couple of years ago with the Energy Security Leadership Council, which was a coalition of energy-consuming CEOs and military officers, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars protecting the oil trades today. We've lost 5,000 of our young men and women in the Middle